So tonight we're going to have our class to prepare us for Pesach. I'd like to talk about the idea of the broken matzah. But before we go there, just like to mention, it comes out in Parshas that this week is also Parshas Vayikra. In Parshas Vayikra, the first word in the Parsha is Vayikra el Moshe, and the Aleph in the word Vayikra is a small Aleph. So everyone knows the famous Bal HaTurim, who says, Aleph de Vayikra ze'ira, the Aleph in the word Vayikra is small. Shemoshe lo ratza lichtov ella Vayakar. Moshe wanted to write the word Vayakar, which we find appears by Bilam, that's the word K'derech Shenemar beBilam, because the word Vayakar means that Hashem happened upon someone. It's a connection which is not of reverence. It's almost makes it seem like an accidental meeting. Oh, once you're here, let me tell you something. When, as Rashi tells us, the word Vayikra is Lashon Chiba. Lashon Shemalachi Asharis Mishtamshim Bo. The word Vayikra with the Aleph is a term of endearment, a term of love. It's the way that the angels speak to each other. So Moshe did not want to write about himself that he was deserving of this level of Vayikra al Moshe, where God calls to him and says, Moshe, Moshe, as if Moshe is on this level that he should have this intimate relationship with Hashem. And Hashem says to Moshe, no you don't. You're putting that aleph there. So Moshe compromised. And he wrote a small aleph. As if to say, I didn't choose to write this aleph. Hashem is making me write it, so I'll write it, but this is, I feel it should be without the aleph. We have to try to understand why Moshe would do that, and what is the message for us about the small aleph. So let's talk about the matzah, specifically the broken matzah. The Gemara in Brachos tells us, Amar of Papa, Hakol Modim, everyone agrees, bePesach, Shemaniach Prusa betoch Shlema ubotseya. That on Pesach, even though every Shabbos and every Yom Tov you're supposed to have Lechem Mishnah. Lechem Mishnah means a whole, a complete loaf. In fact, you're supposed to have a double complete loaf for Shabbos and according to most opinions for Yom Tov too. And if the bread, if the challah is not whole, you have to go find ones that are whole. In fact, even if you have a choice between a very large half challah and a very small whole challah, there's something special about having a shlema, a whole challah. However, on Pesach, that's not the case. On Pesach, we need a prusa. We need we need a piece specifically. The problem is, it's still Yom Tov, and you still have to have a whole. So what we do is, Hakol Modem BePesach Shemaniach Prusa Betoch Shlema, you hold up the broken one and the whole one together, Ubotseya, and you cut it that way. Or break it in our case. My timer, what's the reason? Why should we not fulfill the mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah on Yom Tov? Because lechem oni kesiv, because the Torah says lechem oni, literally it says oni, but we're reading it as ani, as if to say, this is poor man's bread. And poor man's bread, he doesn't have the opportunity to get whole pieces. He goes around asking for handouts, and people give him pieces of bread. So he doesn't get a whole piece. So in order for us to eat our matzah lechem ani, we have to have a broken piece. And there's some question as to the paragraph of halachma anya. This is the poor man's bread, which we say. Many read it as the beginning of the Haggadah. On Shabbos Haggadah, we say from halachma anya all the way till lechaper al kol avonosenu. But there are others who say that the Haggadah begins with Manishtana. Halachma Anya is a comment on the breaking of the matzah. Yachatz, we break the matzah, we take the middle matzah and we break it in half, and we take the smaller piece and we put it back in the ka'ara, which is, we're going to use that for the mitzvah of hamotzi matzah. And the other half we put into a bag or into a pillowcase or into a sack and put it away for the afikoman. That's going to be used for later. And so when we do that, we then need to explain, why are we breaking the matzah? Shouldn't we have lachem mishnah? And the answer is, halachma anya, this is the poor man's bread that our forefathers ate in Egypt. In which case, again, halachma anya might still be the beginnings of the Haggadah, but it's really connected to yachatz rather than to magid. If you look in different Haggadahs, you'll see that there's a custom that many have that they actually announce each of the 15 stations. So when they get to Karpas, they actually say Karpas. When it comes to washing, because they don't want to interrupt, they'll say Rachza, Motzi, Matzah, Mor, or Korech out loud in order to officially declare those stations to have arrived, or us to have arrived at those stations, and then they will do all those things. So if you look in the Haggadah, it actually tells you, now begins Magid. Some Haggadahs will have Magid before Halachma Anya, and some will have it after, depending on this question. It certainly seems from the Shulchan Aruch that Magid begins after, and Halachma Anya is a comment on the breaking of the matzah.
So the actual beginning is at the Manishtana or
Right.
after Manishtana?
Right.
Beginning at
Manishtana would then be the beginning of the Haggadah. So it would be Magid, and then the Manishtana. Of course, that's when we pour the second cup, which begins Magid as well. The question is, why is this concept of having lechem ani, poor man's bread, why is it so important that we end up compromising on the concept of lechem mishnah? Now, we don't end up compromising on lechem mishnah because we've solved the problem by having 3 matzahs. So that even when we break one, the other 2 are still lechem mishnah. But that's the custom of the Arizal. The custom of the Gra was that they would only have 2 matzahs. And there are many people who still do this today. They only have 2 matzahs at the Seder. One is whole and one is broken. And the concept of having lechem ani is going to be more important, is going to push aside the chiyuv of lechem mishnah of a Suda of Yom Tov. And that requires explanation. Furthermore, if the mitzvah is actually to have a broken matzah, according to these opinions, then why do we have the whole matzah there at all? We should just have, if we're halachma anya, the poor man's bread, it's not really poor man's bread if that's just one slice within your pile of whole matzahs. We should put aside all our whole matzahs and only eat the broken bread. The fact that we have whole bread there takes away from this feeling of us feeling like poor people, like slaves.
Is that the same question as why we only break one of them? I mean, if you said you had to have lechem mishnah, you had to start with 2, then I'm asking whether the question would be, why don't you break the other one rather than...
Right, that would be another way of phrasing that question.
Right.
Another question, which may have occurred to you, and if it hasn't, try bringing this up at the Seder. We prepare most of the things for the Seder before we begin Kiddush. We pull out the zeroah, the karpas, the beitza, the charosas, it's all on the table. So even if you don't bring it out for Kiddush, you bring it out right after Kiddush. Why don't we simply go to that box of broken matzahs that we all have, all right, or half of the matzahs in the box which are supposed to be whole, and just pull those out? Why are we bringing a whole matzah and breaking it? It would be much more poor man's bread if you would bring a broken piece of matzah in the first place.
No.
if you take something that's whole and break it, that's symbolically, I think, more of a loss. If something's already broken,
I hear the suggestion, except the way that it's written is that we're taking broken pieces like poor people who all they have is broken pieces. So then we should act like all we have is broken pieces. So even though we've got the other whole ones for Lechem Mishnah, but we should bring to the table a piece which came to us broken.
but if we have whole matzahs.
Well, that's the first question. How do you have whole matzah?
But we already have the whole matzahs, so thank God most of us are not like poor people. We have the whole matzahs.
But we got to play the part.
So, right, but if you already have it whole, then it's more, I think it's more of a loss for someone who has, for what they have to be lost or broken.
I hear that that's a suggestion. Although again, you're losing this aspect of making it look like it's all you have. But yes, that's definitely a suggestion to say that it's because we have whole, we have to actually break in order to show the lechaman.
Isn't the whole Seder a back and forth of Galus and Geula, so that at one point we're reclining, at the next point we're in Marar, and so same thing with the matzah. You start with a whole that's we're free to have whole matzahs to eat with the
That's an interesting idea. The breaking of the matzah is the descent into Egypt. We were free, and now that's a good suggestion too. Okay, you have what to share at the Seder. So there's an interesting suggestion by one of the commentaries, who says that a very interesting idea. Lechem Mishnah doesn't have to be Lechem Mishnah throughout the whole process. But Lechem Mishnah can be fulfilled if you start off with 2 whole loaves. Meaning, if you're at your Shabbos table, while you're making the bracha, one of your challah breaks apart, and half of it falls down. So now it broke while you're in the middle of the bracha. Are we going to say that you should stop what you're doing and go? Yeah, when you brought them to you, they were whole. Yeah, it's not halachic psak. I'm just saying that there's an argument like this. So someone to suggest, and this is a very important concept because this is going to apply to the intentions you have to have at the Seder. How much easier would it be if you could make early Pesach? Not saying it would be easy to make early Pesach. That's, of course, difficult. But if you could, wouldn't it make the Seder somewhat easier? It is getting late this time of year. But you cannot. You cannot do so because the halacha is that we say Yachol me Rosh Chodesh. We talked about this last week. I might have thought that you could begin the Seder from Rosh Chodesh. Talmud Loma Bayamahu Yachol mi ba'od Yom. So I might have said Bayamahu on that day. So we should start mi ba'od Yom. We should start on Erev Pesach. Maybe we should begin earlier on that day. And that's what we say. No, it's only b'shah shematzah umar munachim lefanecha. Which doesn't just mean that the matzah and maror are present, but it means it has to be a time when you could fulfill the mitzvah of matzah and maror. And the mitzvah of matzah and maror, the Torah clearly says at night. So even though you might be able to bring in Pesach early, you can't call it night. And therefore you cannot fulfill any of the mitzvahs of the Seder while it isn't yet night. Which is why we cannot make Kiddush until it is at Pesach or Chavim, until night has fallen, each one according to their opinion of when night is. Furthermore, we know there are 4 cups which we drink on Pesach night, corresponding to the 4 languages of redemption. We talked about this a number of weeks ago. The first cup is the cup of Kiddush, corresponding to the statement of Hashem, V'hotzesi aschem, I will take you out, mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim, from underneath the burden of Egypt. Which means the first cup is actually the fulfillment of the first expression of redemption. Making Kiddush a part of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. Kiddush is actually a part of the Haggadah. It is not just like every other Kiddush where we introduce the Yom Tov and now we can go to the meal. The Kiddush, and some even want to say that the phrase in the Kiddush, Zecher liYitzias Mitzrayim, those three words, where in the Kiddush you say that this Kiddush is to commemorate Yitzias Mitzrayim, is actually your first words in fulfillment of the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim for that night. Accordingly, it comes out then that these opinions want to suggest that since you're making Kiddush with 2 whole matzahs, you have now fulfilled your mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah by beginning the night with 2 whole matzahs. And then, once you get more into it, once you're getting down into the depths of the exile, at that point you break the matzah, and now we're going to fulfill lechem ani, the poor man's bread, but you've already fulfilled some of the Haggadah while the matzah was whole. That's why some want to suggest, and we'll come to maybe a further reason, but that's why some want to suggest that we specifically start with a whole matzah to fulfill the mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah over Kiddush, and then we break it after that. The Sefer Tamei HaMinhagim brings an interesting explanation from the Rebbe of Jikov. He says that the mitzvahs of Pesach night, there's a lot of 4s, a lot of the number 4 which appears in the Pesach Seder. Take a look and you'll see there's a lot of 4s, except the matzahs, which are 3. So he wants to suggest the reason why we break the matzah is in order to make 4 matzahs. The top, the bottom, and the middle counts as 2. So according to this, it would then fit very well that once you've drank the first cup and you've now introduced the 4 languages of redemption, and so now there comes this argument for let there be 4, right, 4 score, then we would break the matzah in order to have it join the ranks of all the 4s. But again, I think we're still at this point in the world of Pshat. We're still in the simple understandings of the attempt to balance all the requirements of the night. We want Lechem Mishnah, but we want Lechem Ani. We want to have Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim at the beginning. We want to break it later in order to fulfill both aspects of this concept. But the question is, why do we break the middle matzah? Why do we break the middle matzah? Why don't we break the top matzah? The top matzah is the one which we are faced with first. Why should we not break it? So let's work here. We're going to start in the world of Pshat, and then we'll try to descend through deeper levels. In the world of Pshat, it's because later we are going to be making 2 brachas. The first bracha is Hamotzi Lachem Min Haaretz, which we make before we eat bread, before we have any meal. After we make the bracha of Hamotzi, we're then going to make a special bracha for the mitzvah, for the opportunity, Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu al achilas matzah. If you recall from last year's Seder and from the year before that, at least for those people who have 3 matzahs, when you make the bracha of Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, you lift up all 3 matzahs. Because you're making Hamotzi over Lechem Mishnah. Like we said, that's our way of avoiding this issue. But then we put down the bottom matzah. We drop the bottom matzah because for the mitzvah of al achilas matzah, we don't want whole matzahs. We want the broken matzah. And so we only take the broken and the whole. But why don't we only take the broken? Because we're going to be eating from both the top one and the bottom one. So therefore, hear this. Since the first bracha we're going to make is the bracha of Hamotzi, which primarily refers to the top matzah, and only that's going to be followed by the bracha of al achilas matzah, referring to the broken one. Therefore, we want the whole matzah on top and the broken matzah underneath it. A very simple explanation in the world of Pshat, because we have a rule. Ein mavirin al ha-mitzvos. You're not supposed to pass over, pun intended, a mitzvah once it comes before you. So whenever you have a mitzvah, you're supposed to do that mitzvah with the thing which is first. So you're supposed to set yourself up that way. That's why, for example, with tefillin, since we put on the tefillin of the shel yad first, you're always supposed to make sure that the way you put away your tefillin, that you should always pull out the tefillin shel yad first, so that you should not have to pass over it, the shel rosh, in order to get to the shel yad. The same thing with the way that the talis is situated in the bag, and the way that we set up our chalos on Shabbos. So in the same way, since the hamotzi is going to come first, followed by the alachilas matzah, we have the top one and then the bottom one. But clearly, I think everyone would want that there should be a deeper explanation here. So you've all heard that the three matzahs represent Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. Why should we have three matzahs corresponding to the three different kinds of Jews that there are?
And why does Levi get broken?
Why does Levi get broken? So, the most common explanation given is that Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael are actually a little insight into the story. Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael are Aaron, Moshe, and the Jewish people who are being redeemed. And since we don't mention Moshe in the Haggadah, as we talked about this last week, we don't mention him in the Haggadah, but we do want to give Moshe Rabbeinu, excuse the term, we want to give him a shout out. So we perform the main mitzvah of the night on that matzah which represents Moshe Rabbeinu, the matzah of Levi. And that's why we specifically take the middle matzah corresponding to Moshe Rabbeinu to have a zecher to Moshe. And that's nice because we do want Moshe Rabbeinu to be somehow alluded to in the Seder. There's another explanation, which I'm not going to go into it too much because I don't know if we have time for this, but there's another explanation that the three matzahs represent Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And Yitzchak, in the future, the Gemara tells us, will be the great defender of the Jewish people. And at one point in the argument, he says to Hashem, he says, you know, why don't you bear half the sins of the Jewish people and I'll bear half the sins of the Jewish people? So I'm not going into it too deeply. You can see that Gemara, it's in Shabbos 89. So to a certain, we're kind of alluding to that by breaking the Yitzchak matzah, and it turns out that the Yitzchak actually contains the word Yachatz in it. It's those letters, and the word Chatzi, which is, of course, the same letters as Yachatz, but that's not where we're going, so we're going to come back to this.
Is there additional significance to breaking the Levi, which is Moshe, to signify his humility?
His what?
His humility.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll come back to that. Let's stop for a second and turn to the end of the Seder, the bigger half of the broken matzah, what we call the afikomen. What is the afikomen, and what does the word afikomen actually mean? So you may be surprised to hear this. The word afikomen means, let's bring out the dessert. Afiku man, bring out the dessert. Now, why would we name the matzah afikoman, bring out dessert? So it's actually very simple. It's based on the language of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, and everyone knows this Mishnah because this Mishnah is the response to the Chacham, Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikoman, which according to one opinion in the Gemara means, Ein maftirin, we don't finish off or clean the palate, we don't complete the meal after eating the Korban Pesach by saying, Afikuman, bring out dessert. We don't follow the Korban Pesach with the statement of bring out dessert, because the Korban Pesach is the fulfillment of bring out dessert. So Afikuman, or Afikoman, means bring out the dessert, the Pesach replaces that.
What language is that?
Aramaic.
Okay.
And so, even though we don't have the Korban Pesach, we don't have that lamb that's been on the rotisserie for a number of hours, that was fresh, shechted earlier that day, but we have the matzah instead, yummy, delicious matzah, and so we refer to that matzah as well as afikoman, bring out the dessert, as if the matzah is going to be the dessert. And that's what we tell the chacham. We teach him the halachas that we don't eat anything after the afikoman. And here we come to a big, big debate. We discussed this in the classes we had on Friday night, but just in brief, at what point during the Seder do I fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah? I think most people will immediately respond with, when I first eat the matzah. Because we make the bracha, Asher kedishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu ala achilas matzah. Then we take the middle matzah and the top matzah. And if you don't have enough within that matzah for everyone, then you take pieces and hand it around, kazesim, hand it around, and give each person a small piece of the middle and the top matzah. And we lean while we eat it, and most people will concentrate and think at that moment in time that they are eating the matzah of the mitzvah. However, it is a machlokas. It is a disagreement amongst the Rishonim. There are those who say that you fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with that, the first matzah that you eat that night, while there are others who say that the real fulfillment of the mitzvah of eating matzah is the afikoman. This might create some halachic difficulties, especially since there are those who would argue that according to those opinions, you would not be allowed to interrupt with anything not related to the Seder from your mitzvah of ala achilas matzah all the way till the eating of the afikoman. We don't paskin like this, and certainly we go off into conversations, although conversations during the Seder should all be holy and related to Pesach. But nevertheless, we don't have this expectation of, but there are those who would argue this, because there are Rishonim who say, and this might seem strange to you, but think about it for a second. When did they eat the matzah in the days of the Beis HaMikdash?
With the Korban Pesach.
With the Korban Pesach. They made a sandwich, they put the matzah and the maror, and so you had matzah and the lettuce, and then you had a piece of lamb in between. So, and when do we eat what we call our Zeichel Korban Pesach? By the Afikoman. So then that matzah, which is without the maror and without the Pesach, but since that's the moment when we're eating, so to speak, we don't of course say this because we don't want to make it look like we're having sacrifices outside the temple, but that's the time which we are having the Zeichel Korban Pesach, so they argue that that moment should be the time that we're really fulfilling the mitzvah of Korban Pesach.
Why is the afikoman the time that...
Because that's in place of the Korban Pesach. Because the Korban Pesach is eaten at the end of the meal, Ein maftir nachar Pesach afikoman. So that's the afikoman is then the replacement of the Korban Pesach. That's why we don't eat or drink anything other than the wine and water after eating the afikoman, so that the taste of the afikoman remains in our mouth, much like we did in the case of the Korban Pesach, where we ate nothing afterwards to keep the taste of the Korban Pesach in our mouth.
Wait, the meat part of the meal was the last part of the meal?
Yeah, the chagiga, the other korban, was the meat which we ate for the main meal. But then, ein maftir and achara pesach afikoman means you eat nothing after the Korban Pesach, because it is your dessert. It's the afikoman. It's the bring out the dessert.
So if you wanted real dessert, you'd have to eat it before that.
Right, you'd have to eat it before then. So, and that's what we do if you want dessert at the Pesach Seder. You have to eat it before the Afikoman. So they say then that the Afikoman then is the real fulfillment of the mitzvah of eating matzah. So that's an interesting debate, and I'd like to, if we can, try to find a deeper meaning into this debate so that we have what to think about when we eat these different matzahs.
Why don't we eat the maror at the same time then, since the commandment is al matzot marorim yochluhu? So why don't we eat the afikomen with the maror and?
Because we're not eating Korban Pesach, we're having the matzah in its place, and we're having the maror sandwich as the korech.
But why don't we do it at the time? I mean, if that's supposed to be the fulfillment of it, then why don't we do it at the time that?
Because the korech is more is also not really a fulfillment. We don't want to. It's just a zecher. It's just to remind us of how we would do it if we were at that time.
So if there was a Beis Hamikdash, we would then have matzahs with the Korban Pesach at the time of the Korban Pesach.
Right.
We would not have the maror.
No, we would. We would have it together too.
Then we would have.
Right. Right. And it seems that we would have matzah at the beginning of the meal there too, but maybe the ala achilas matzah. There's a lot of debate over this. It's a very complicated issue. But just in terms of how it applies, there's a debate amongst the Rishonim when we are really fulfilling the mitzvah of achilas matzah. Some say it's the first, and some say it's the last.
Are there any Haggadahs existing from before the Beis Hamikdash was
No,
destroyed?
we don't have anything like that. The oldest we have is 1,000 years old. I mean, we have the Gemara. The Gemara discusses this, and the Gemara does tell us that we replace the Korban Pesach with matzah.
Uh-huh.
So the Gemara tells us that, so we know that. The question is then, though, in our Seder, which one is it? But it shouldn't be lost on anyone, and that's where we're going to take this to a more deeper understanding, that the debate is not so much whether it's the first matzah of the night or the last matzah of the night, but are you fulfilling the mitzvah with the smaller piece or the bigger piece? Because it's the smaller piece that we're eating for the al achilas matzah, and it's the bigger piece which we're eating for the afikomen. And so now when you break your matzah in half, you have two pieces of matzah. According to some, this is the real matzah, and according to some, that's the real matzah.
But you eat a whole piece also with the broken matzah.
We are, but that's for sure not the mitzvah of the fulfillment of al achilas matzah, because al achilas matzah is lechem only a broken piece. It's just we don't know if it's the bigger piece or the smaller piece. That matzah is more because of lechem mishnah.
Right, so you are eating a whole piece.
Right, but that's lechem mishnah. In terms of, we're talking about the mitzvah of the fulfillment of al achilas matzah of the night, which must be done over a broken piece. We're now having this debate whether it's the smaller piece or the bigger piece. So there's a Haggadah called Chodesh Ha'aviv. He quotes the Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara says that today we make a blessing on good tidings, Hatov v'Hametiv. And we make a blessing on bad tidings, Baruch Dayan Ha'emes. Says the Gemara that that's all because we don't understand that Gamzu L'Tova, that Kolma the Avid Rahman L'Tav Avid. In the world which we live in, we are unable to perceive that. But there will come a time, says the Gemara, where Kashem Shemevarchim al Hatova, Kach Mevarchim al Hara, which doesn't just mean that with the same level of bitachon and acceptance and all those things, but literally for everything that happens to us, when there will come that day, when we will understand how things happen and why things happen, at that point we will make the same bracha, we will make hatov v'hametiv for everything that happens to us. The smaller piece is our glass less than half empty perspective. The smaller piece is, because it's smaller, the smaller piece represents us seeing the world as not just broken, but lacking, insufficient, inadequate, difficult. The smaller piece represents our misunderstanding or our inability to understand why bad things happen. And that we keep in front of us. and we say, Ha lachma anya, this is the poor man's bread. And we take the bigger piece, the piece that says that there's so much more that we don't understand. And we put that away. We put that away for the future. And we say, we are not ready. And we name that part of the station, that station in the Haggadah, Tzafun. Tzafun means concealed, hidden. We put it away, we hide it away, and we say, we don't understand how this world works.
Well, you put away the bigger pieces.
Right, the bigger piece.
So how do
Which is the perspective that everything is really for the best.
So we put it away because we don't really
Right.
understand how it's for the best.
Right. And so, you ready for this? We are unable to. We should be, according to this, he doesn't say this, but we should be able to make the bracha on the afikoman. We should be able to say al achilas matzah if we would really understand that there is no lechem oni. There's no poor man's bread. It was all part of the plan of Hashem to bring the Jewish people to Har Sinai, to turn them into the chosen people, to make them Hashem's treasure. We look at Mitzrayim, in the end, we can look back at the end of those 400 years or 210 years and say that was Hashem's plan. We've looked at it so many times, again and again, and we even talk about the suffering that it was to atone for all these souls that were lost. There was a whole system which the holy books have given us insight to. And so after we experience Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we've eaten the lechem ani, we've eaten the poor man's bread, it elevates us. The Zohar refers to matzah as maichla de mehemenusa, the food of faith. Eating matzah empowers us to have a greater level of faith. We have to make ourselves vessels to receive that kind of heavenly bounty. But if we do, if we allow the matzah and everything that it represents to permeate us, we can come at the end of the Seder and say, you know what? Let's take out the afikoman too. And let's make that and say that even though we're not at this place yet, but we're looking forward to that day. What do we do after that? We bench and we fill a fourth cup. But at the same time we fill the fourth cup, we also fill the fifth cup. We don't drink it because we're not ready yet to understand the meaning behind the fifth cup, behind the fixing of the world and the ultimate redemption. We call it the Kos of Eliyahu Hanavi, because Eliyahu Hanavi is the one who will herald the great fixing of the world. But we're not quite ready for that yet. And so we leave the fifth cup without drinking it. We open the door to invite Eliyahu Hanavi in, as if to say, where are you? It's been 2,000 years of exile, and we're still waiting to be able to drink the fifth cup. And we daven, we say a prayer, Shvo Chamascha El Hagayim. Hashem, do you see that the whole world is filled with people who don't know your name, Asher Lo Yudaucha, who don't know that you run the world? But we are not like that. We're going to recite Hallel. We don't just recite Hallel on Pesach night. We recite Hallel Hagadol, the great Hallel. Because we are now in a place where we know that the real place we want to be is L'shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, Hashata Hacha. That's in Halach Ma'anya. We start Halach Ma'anya and we say this year we're still here. Maybe next year, L'shana Haba B'Ardi Yisrael. Hashata Avdi, this year we're slaves. L'shana Haba B'nei Chor. And that's how we start the Seder. That's the broken bread. But the whole bread doesn't have this year we are here, this year we're slaves. That's just the Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. And so, we don't just break the matzah. We break the Seder. Somewhere between the motzi, matzah, maror, korech, somewhere in the Shulchan Orech, somewhere in that process, we've moved from lechem ani to maichala de mehemenusa, from poor man's bread to bread of faith. By the time we reach the afikoman, we have reached such a holy place that we can now begin to see how maybe there's much more to the world than we can understand, and we start praying for that. There's a sefer called Chazdei David by the son, Reb David Bernstein, the son of the Shemesh Shmuel, who says, where do we find the word yachatz in the Torah? So he says, Yaakov Avinu is being chased by his brother, being pursued by his brother with 400 men. And it says, Vayachatz es ha'am, and he split the people into two camps. And he said, if Esav will attack this camp, then the other camp will survive. And Rashi adds the words, V'haya machna nisha lefleta, the remaining camp will be a remnant, they'll survive. Rashi says, Al karcho, against his will, which is against whose will? So it says the Chazdei David that you have an inside, you have your soul, and you have your outside. You have your body. The soul, the inside of you, that part of you can never become corrupted. Even when a person sins, even when someone deviates from the path, but there's a part of you that never becomes corrupted. Our sages teach us, Afal pi shechata Yisraelhu. It doesn't matter. A person can go and choose to name themselves and make themselves into all kinds of other religions, try to convert. A Jew is a Jew and always is a Jew. And not just they're a Jew, but Afal pi shechata Yisraelhu. Not just, but Yisrael. Yisrael is the higher level of being a Jew. But you have a division inside you. And he says that yachatz, this is what the Chazdei David says, at the point where you take the matzah in hand and you break it in half, or whoever does that, you're not just breaking the matzah, and not just breaking the seder, as we said, but it's breaking you in half. When the matzah breaks, we break. And the smaller half, that's the outside of you. That's the part of you that's less significant. That's the part of you which is only in this world, a fleeting, short-lived life. That's the smaller half of the matzah. And that can be attacked by Esav and his minions. That can be defeated. That can be brought down into the darkness. But there's a tzafon. There's a part of you, that bigger half, that you set aside and you say, deep inside, I know that I am always connected to Hashem. I'm just not so in touch with that half of me. But I can get there. And so we take the broken half of the matzah, the smaller half, and we have it in front of us throughout the Seder. And we work with it. And we talk about the troubles that we went through in Egypt and how Hashem saved us. And at the same time, we're talking about the troubles in our lives and how Hashem has carried us through that. And we talk about that. We talk about the maror and we talk about the matzah. We talk about the dam and we talk about the yayin. We talk about the good and the bad. And then somewhere again, at the end of the Seder, we say, this isn't what I really am. All the dark places, all the failures of the year, that's not me. And we take out the afikoman. We take out the bigger piece. And we say, this was untouched. Of course, the illusion might be lost if by then the afikoman is somewhat in crumbs. But the message isn't lost. There's that part of you that's been put away. and v'haya machna nishar lefleta, the other half remains and will survive. Bal karcho means there's nothing you can do to lose that. And so Pesach, according to the Chazdei David, the Pesach Seder, is about reminding us that Chacham, Rasha, Tam, She'eni Yedei Lishol, everyone is at the Seder and no one is lost. Maybe, as some say, Ilu hayasham lo hayanigal, had the Rasha been there, maybe he wouldn't have been redeemed. But now that he's not there, now that he's here, he is fully redeemed. Because once they came to Har Sinai, once we came to Har Sinai, there is no losing of the neshama. And if I may, just a little bit, he says that our sages tell us that the matzah is called lechem oni, which we read as lechem ani, poor man's bread, but also lechem oni, bread which we speak about. Lechem ani represents our impoverishment, our failures. Lechem oni, it represents the bread of our response, the bread of our pride, the bread of our exaltation. So he adds a Kabbalistic nuance to this, which it's hard to go into, especially since most of the commentaries, the Kabbalistic sources, say that the two pieces of matzah are a daled and a vav, which we're not going to go into. But he says that the two pieces of matzah are the two hays of Hashem's name. And that's why we would break the middle matzah as if the top matzah is the yud of Hashem's name. The bottom matzah is the vav of Hashem's name. And the middle matzah, we break it in half to get the two hays. One goes on top, in Hashem's name, one would be before the vav, one would be after the vav. But he says that we know that the teshuvah, which is tashuv hay, to bring back the hay, it connects both to the upper hay and the lower hay. Because the matzah is about the message that we are never lost. But the Zera Kodesh of Rupshitz adds a further level to this. He says that we know that every person has a nefesh, a ruach, and a neshama. The nefesh represents the basic life of you. Just your life source, the blood that pumps within you. Every animal has a nefesh. Even vegetables might have some level of nefesh while they are alive. Nefesh just means life source. That part of you only desires physicality. Your body just wants food, warmth, comfort. These are the things that your body wants. Your neshama wants only spiritual. Your neshama would not be interested in food at all. Your neshama barely benefits. It just benefits from the fact that your body is sustained so that it can continue to do mitzvahs. But between the nefesh and the neshama is your ruach, the spirit. We find there's a ruach tahara and there's a ruach tumah. The ruach is the part of you which chooses which direction to go. That's the point where your free will is. The ruach. We also say that the neshama is related to the mind, the nefesh is related to the body, which is thought and action, and the ruach is related to speech. That's why it comes out as wind, as ruach mamalawa. So says the Zera Kodesh of Rupshitz that the three matzahs, which are Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, are also the neshama, the ruach, and the nefesh. And we take the middle matzah, called Levi. The word Levi itself actually means connection. That's why she named him Levi, to say, now that I have 3 children, my husband will be connected to me. Hapam yilava elai ishi. But it's the ruach which is the connection. And we take that and break it in half. The smaller half represents your choices to go towards the nefesh, the physicality. And the bigger half represents those times that you choose to follow the neshama. if I may, he doesn't say this, but going all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Adam takes, according to some, it was a bread tree, it would have been matzah. Adam takes, or it was wine, depending on different opinions, right? He would have, well, matzah wasn't crunchy then, but Adam Arishon eats from the tree, and what happens? We're told he gained knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge of good and evil is a good thing. It was confusion of good and evil. He gained knowledge of evil as good and good as evil. Now there's an eruv of Tov Ra. The process of taking the matzah and breaking it in half is the act of undoing the sin of Adam Arishon. There's a confusion of good and evil, and we take it and break it in half, and we say this is the half of lechem ani, of impoverishment, of evil in the world, which is connected to the nefesh. And this other part, that's the part which represents the good, the part which is hidden and is concealed. We talked last week about Yachol me Rosh Chodesh. Maybe we should start the Seder on Rosh Chodesh. And we said this because the Jewish people represent the cycle of the moon. The lower half, the smaller half of the matzah, is the moon when it is in a broken state. And the bigger half is the moon in a greater state. The real place where we want to be is to be able to fulfill the moon, to bring back the two pieces, to put them together by first eating the smaller half and elevating that, and then bringing ourselves up to this place where we can elevate the greater half as well. The eating of the both halves of the matzah represents the fixing of the loss of the light of the moon. Lechem ani, lechem oni. How beautiful then is it that the custom became to have specifically round matzahs, especially for the Seder, because that represents the moon and its blemish. It represents the blemish inside of us, the confusion of good and evil. There's a custom that many have when they break the matzah, that they put it on their shoulders and walk around the table or walk around the block. So this may ring to previous classes, but we talked about the lower level of understanding of Hashem, which is Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso, and the higher level of understanding of Hashem, which is Shema Yisrael. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso is the world which we live in, where we see trouble, where we see difficulties, where we see mistakes that we've made, where we have a confusion of good and evil. But Shema Yisrael, Echad mi yodea, Echad Elokeinu asher shmayim va'aretz, Ani v'lo malach, Ani v'lo saraf, that level of understanding of Hashem, which we talked about in the previous class, Echad chacham ve'echad tam, it's all Echad. That level of understanding of Hashem is something which we're working to try to reach. So of course, what's the word for shoulder in Lashon Kodesh? It says in the Torah, Misharosam tzeruros besimlosam al shichmam. The word for shoulder is shechem, which is Shem Kavod Malchuso. Because at that point, when we're walking with the Seder, we know that Hashem is taking us out. But we don't have a clue that while we are walking, Hashem is baking the bread over our shoulders. It's behind us. We have no awareness. It's only once we arrive at our station, we open up the bag and we see Hashem has made matzah. We are traveling now on that road with our bag of troubles over our shoulders. And we think it's trouble because we haven't had time to bake the bread. We haven't had time to allow it to become something. But the future will come when we will take out the afikomen. But in order to do that, we have to be willing not just to break the matzah, but to break the Seder in half, but to break ourselves in half. We have to come ready for the Pesach Seder, to break who we are. You know what we need by the Seder? We need a small aleph. We need that small aleph of Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the broken matzah. He is the broken matzah. He is the Levi. We take Moshe Rabbeinu and we break him, the Vayikra and the Aleph. We recognize that Moshe Rabbeinu, as great as he became, was still unable to really see himself as somehow deserving. And yet Hashem says to him, no, I want you to write that Aleph. Because we're going to put together the smaller half of the matzah and the bigger half of the matzah. We're going to bring out the afikomen and we're going to say we're going to introduce this. Maybe we're not on the level to make the bracha on the afikomen, so we make the bracha on the earlier part. But the afikomen is where we say the future redemption will come with an awareness. I want to finish with a beautiful teaching from the Rabbi, who once quipped by saying that there is nothing more slanty, I should say off balance, than a ladder which is straight up. Ladders are supposed to lean. There is nothing more crooked than a smooth talker. And there is nothing more whole than a broken heart. That's what the Zera Kodesh of Rabbi said. And the matzah represents the breaking of our hearts. The matzah represents the breaking of ourselves. At the beginning of the Seder, maybe not by Kiddush, but a little bit later, we take the matzah, we break it in half, and we say, we are willing to change. We're willing to go through this process. We are ready to leave, not just the Mitzrayim of the past, but the Mitzrayim of the present. We are ready to reconnect to Hashem, and we are ready to pour the fifth cup. And we open the door, and we say, let Eliyahu Hanavi come. Let him herald the final redemption, when the entire world will know. Bayom Hahu yiyeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will come and destroy the Malach HaMavis, which is how some end the Seder, as if to say, at that point the world will be fixed with all of its troubles.